Right. So, you know how everyone's been banging on about Reform UK like they're the new kids on the block? Well, turns out they're not just the new kids anymore, they're running the entire playground. While Keir Starmer's been busy losing members faster than a gym loses New Year's resolutioners by February, Nigel Farage has been quietly building what's now officially the biggest political party in Britain. And no, that's not a typo. Reform UK has more paying members than Labour. Let that sink in for a moment. The party that's been around for basically 5 minutes has just overtaken the supposed party of the working class. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff if you tried, but here we are, living through what might be the most bizarre political realignment in modern British history. So let's talk numbers, because this is where it gets absolutely mental. Reform UK has a public counter, right? Like they're tracking subscribers on a YouTube channel, and it's currently sitting at 268,703 members and climbing. Meanwhile, Labour's been treating their membership figures like their nuclear launch codes, keeping them locked away from public view for months. Wonder why? Well, leaked internal figures seen by The Times have revealed the uncomfortable truth. Labour's got just 250,000 members left. They've been overtaken. The revolutionaries have become the establishment, and the establishment is now, apparently, Reform UK. Here's the really staggering bit, though. Since Keir Starmer walked through the door of number 10, Labour has hemorrhaged a whopping 100,000 members. That's not a slow decline. That's a full-blown exodus. We're talking about people actively canceling their memberships, looking at what Labour's become under Starmer and going, nah, not for me, cheers. And get this, Labour's membership has literally halved since Starmer won the leadership contest back in 2020. They went from over 500,000 under Jeremy Corbyn to 250,000 now. Say what you want about Corbyn, and trust me, people have said plenty, but the man knew how to keep the membership engaged. Starmer, on the other hand, seems to have found the way to make people actively unsubscribe from his political project. Now, before we get too carried away with Reform's meteoric rise, let's put this whole thing in context, because British politics right now looks like a game of musical chairs where half the chairs have collapsed and everyone's scrambling for what's left. Reform didn't just overtake Labour, they already sailed past the Conservatives on Boxing Day last year. Yes, Boxing Day. While everyone else was eating leftover turkey and avoiding their relatives, Reform was quietly celebrating becoming bigger than the Tories, who at that point had about 123,000 members. And that number's probably even lower now because, let's be honest, being a Conservative Party member these days is about as fashionable as admitting you still use Internet Explorer. The Greens, bless them, have actually had a bit of a resurgence lately. Thanks to their new leader, Zach Polanski, they've managed to boost their membership to around 180,000, which is genuinely impressive. But they're still well behind Reform and Labour in this bizarre membership arms race we found ourselves watching. The Lib Dems, meanwhile, are pottering along with about 83,000 members, according to figures from last August. And Jeremy Corbyn's new venture, Your Party, has clocked up about 50,000. So basically, the entire landscape has been reshuffled, and the old certainties about who's big and who's small have been completely turned on their head. Nigel Farage, never one to miss an opportunity for a victory lap, responded to the news with characteristic confidence, declaring that Reform is now the largest political party in British politics, and calling it a huge milestone. He went on to pronounce the age of two-party politics dead. Now, whether you love him or loathe him, and there's rarely much middle ground with Farage, you have to admit the man's got a point. The traditional Labour-Conservative duopoly that's dominated British politics for over a century is looking increasingly shaky. When a party that's barely out of its political infancy is attracting more paying members than Labour, something fundamental has shifted. Lee Anderson, with his typical subtlety, chimed in with, "Size matters. It really does." Eloquent as ever, that one. But here's where this story gets even more interesting, because membership numbers are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Reform UK isn't just winning the membership game, they're dominating across multiple metrics that actually matter when it comes to political success. They've led in every single one of the last 150 voter intention polls. Let that number sink in for a second. 150 consecutive polls. That's not a fluke, that's not a honeymoon period, that's a genuine sustained shift in public opinion. They've also managed to rake in more cash than all the other parties combined last quarter, which suggests that they're not just popular with regular folks, but they're also attracting serious financial backing. And it doesn't stop there. Since May, Reform has notched up more council by-election wins than all other parties. These aren't just hypothetical polling numbers or membership statistics. These are actual elections where real people are going to real polling stations and putting their crosses next to Reform candidates. They're building a genuine ground game, establishing themselves in local councils, creating the infrastructure that successful parties need. This isn't just a protest movement anymore. It's becoming a serious political machine with roots spreading across the country. The defections are another fascinating element to this whole saga. Former Tory MP Ben Bradley jumped ship to Reform just this week, and last weekend they picked up their first peer, Lord Offord. Now, defections are always politically significant, but what's particularly noteworthy here is the direction of travel. We're not seeing people leave Reform for other parties. We're seeing a steady trickle of established politicians from traditional parties deciding that Reform is where they want to be. That tells you something about where these politicians think the future of British politics is heading. They're reading the room, looking at the data, and making calculated decisions about their political careers. And right now, they're calculating that Reform is on the up. So what's actually happening here? Why are we witnessing this seismic shift in British membership and allegiance? Well, there's a few theories worth examining. First up is the Starmer effect, or perhaps more accurately, the lack of Starmer effect. When he took over Labour's leadership, there was this sense that he represented a return to electability, a more moderate, sensible alternative to the Corbyn years. And sure, he won the general election, got himself into number 10, mission accomplished. But here's the thing about being in government. People actually expect you to do stuff, and the stuff Labour's government has done hasn't exactly set the world on fire. Whether it's the winter fuel payment cuts, the perception of broken promises, or just a general sense that Labour's not really standing for anything particularly distinctive, the enthusiasm has evaporated faster than water in the Sahara. Labour's traditional base is feeling abandoned. The working-class voters who were supposed to be Labour's natural constituency are looking around and asking, what exactly is this Labour government doing for them? Meanwhile, the more left-wing members who were energized by Corbyn's leadership are absolutely horrified by Starmer's more centrist approach and his willingness to abandon policies they considered fundamental. You end up with this perfect storm where nobody's particularly happy, and the membership numbers reflect that dissatisfaction in the most brutal way possible, through cancellations. On the flip side, Reform UK has positioned itself as the party that's willing to say the unsayable, to challenge the establishment consensus, to give voice to concerns that many voters feel have been ignored by mainstream parties. Whether it's on immigration, on national identity, on Brexit follow-through, Reform has carved out clear positions that resonate with a significant chunk of the electorate. And love them or hate them, they've been remarkably consistent in their messaging. Farage is a political showman who knows how to capture attention and hold it, and Reform has benefited enormously from his media savvy and ability to frame debates. There's also a generational and cultural shift happening here that we can't ignore. Traditional party loyalty isn't what it used to be. People don't inherit their political allegiances from their parents the way they once did. There's much more fluidity, more willingness to switch allegiance based on current performance rather than historical tribalism. The idea of being a Labour voter or a Conservative voter for life is increasingly outdated. People are consumers of politics now, shopping around for the party that best represents their current views and interests. And right now, for a growing number of people, that party is Reform. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Membership numbers, while significant, don't automatically translate into electoral success under British first-past-the-post system. Reform could have 1 million members and still struggle to convert that into parliamentary seats if their support is spread thinly across the country rather than concentrated in specific constituencies. The local election wins they've been racking up are important building blocks, but winning council seats is a very different beast than winning Westminster seats. The general election showed us that Reform can attract votes, lots of them, but the electoral system doesn't always reward that with proportional representation. There's also the question of sustainability. Political momentum can shift remarkably quickly. Remember the Liberal Dems in 2010? They went from junior coalition partners to electoral oblivion in the space of one parliament. The SNP looked inassailable in Scotland for years and then suddenly faced significant challenges. Nothing in politics is permanent, and the Forum will need to prove they can maintain this growth, keep these members engaged, and continue to attract new supporters as the novelty factor inevitably wears off. Farage has said he's committed to reform for the long haul, but he's also stepped back from political projects before. What happens to reform if Farage decides he's had enough? Does the party have the institutional strength and depth of talent to survive without its figurehead? The other parties aren't going to sit around and let reform dominate without response. The Conservatives are in the midst of their own identity crisis, trying to figure out what they stand for post-Boris, post-Truss, post-Sunak. There's a faction within the Tory party that wants to move rightward to compete with reform, to win back those voters they've lost. If they manage to get their act together and articulate a compelling conservative vision, they could potentially stem the tide of